Good afternoon. Thank you in the back, and I'll pretend that this was my classroom, so I'll wait for everybody's attention. I don't like hearing or reading about myself, just my content. My mother made me do this, so I told her, I said, I was gonna say that. But it spoke to me earlier when I heard Mother Ellis give her sermon about how she was hesitant about the word crisis herself, and so was I. I think about it the way she herself thought about it, as in a crisis when we do nothing more than what's already there. The crisis is simply not being aware, not knowing, not pretty much ignoring where we are and not going forward. I have been the only Black student in an educational setting. When I attended Albany and eventually graduated, I was that only Black student in a history class, in political science class. And all the way up to graduation, I remember my mother whispering to me after, "Were you the only Black one in class?" And at Albany, they had their massive, huge graduation, but also separate department graduation, so that's how she saw that. And when I went to my history graduation, I was the only Black student graduating. And then when we went to our poli-sci graduation, I was again the only Black student graduating. And I pretty much grew up in a time, and it still might be the case, where if you were a Black child going to college, you majored in business, psychology, or pre-law. And that's pretty much where, at least in my generation, most Black people, and it started with some computer technology also, that's where they were. And so there were no other Black children in the poli-sci or the history classes with me. So that was something I did notice and see very soon. Now, for myself, African American or Black students, what we have to start off knowing is just about motivation. And it starts off in terms of a crisis with just the beginning. How much exposure are you aware of that our students are getting? When I say our students, not just Black students, but all immigrant populations. Because it's not a crisis just in Black education, but for Hispanics, English language learners, special education, and it goes on and on. So while we embrace our own history, remember, we're also the forerunners of every other minority group, and we have to be able to start not only with ourselves, but then look to see how we are also uplifting each other in every other community. So even when I was younger, I was that student going to science classes on the weekends. If you're aware of the Prep for Prep program, I was in that in middle school. I went to law program classes on Saturdays for NYU, and I got that exposure. But when I started being aware and teaching in 2008, I realized a lot of those programs just don't exist anymore. And if they do exist, they are so low-key, low-profile now that we can't even find them. I was able to do that. Even most of you who've known me for a very long time, even when I went to Israel in high school, it was through a public education partnership with the American Israeli Friendship League. They don't even do those cultural exchanges anymore. So this is what I mean about, are we aware of the exposures that are out there and our willingness to make those partnerships with others as well. So when I started off in the Bronx, I was thrown for a loop because this is how I grew up, what I just taught you and shared with you. And I encountered teaching 7th and 8th grade with students that just didn't care. Where they were coming from at home, it was this is where they needed to be because the government told them to do so. It was a new experience for me to see and meet parents who simply sent their children so they could get their check from the state. So I did not grow up in that kind of atmosphere, but I quickly had to learn how to connect, because although I was black like them, or a person of color like them, I got that much more little respect because of that. But then you still had to meet the challenge of, did you see them? Did you want to know those particular students? And being black myself just got that much more than a white teacher. It wasn't that much more. I had to earn their respect. They had to know that I cared about them, and then I could actually break through. But when we look at the crisis, again, it does start with preschool. It starts with birth. My students in 7th and 8th grade, I had someone that was going to turn 18 in my 8th grade class in my first year of teaching. 18 in 8th grade. So when we talk about that, we see someone preschool, you're learning to read and write almost if you're in the right place. And then someone who, in New York, you didn't necessarily have to, if you didn't know, kindergarten wasn't required until a few years ago. So you could have simply been someone who went into 1st grade and that was your first education experience. And that's what I encountered. That is the crisis. How do you close the gap when you are now in 7th, 8th grade and you are reading on a 1st or 2nd grade reading level? That is the gap. That's the crisis. So if you are not aware, exposure, things like that are one part. That's the heart. And that is the disconnect in terms of where our students are actually going to go. Where are they going to move forward? Because no matter how much I have my mom's experience in teaching preschool or her ELA background in English and things like that, 7th grade, that's tough. How are you building all of those skills to just write a sentence? A grammatically correct sentence. Not to mention the actual history I need to teach them. So I had to kind of refocus and find that teacher I knew I had to be to reach those particular students, which were 90% of my students, pretty much. Because even those that could read on grade level, it wasn't fluency, it wasn't fluent reading, they could just recognize words and put it together in a sentence. So when we talk about that crisis, that is my focus here. Now, something else you may not know, or you do, schools get graded, public schools. Now, part of that grade comes from how well you're actually moving your students. So you get, like, think of pluses or check marks. Did I move X amount of students from one grade level of reading to another? Did I get X amount of students to go from a 3 or a 2 on a state exam to a 4? And the biggest category that's there that you may not be aware of, how many black students, black boys in particular, are able to go from one grade to another? Same thing with Hispanic boys. That's a check mark in the Department of Education. You get points for that as a school because that is so low that that's a goal that a school gets points for. And the only reason you have that dedication of teachers in some schools or in some communities is to get those points. And it's a certain number. It's not like you're trying to move all of them, just enough to kind of get that check. What I did love about my school in the Bronx, it was 6 through 12. So I taught 7th grade, but I was fortunate to see all of my students, as much of them as possible, go all the way to 12th grade. I still attend and see their 12th grade graduations. This is kind of my last year this year with my bunch, because I spent 5 years there, graduating this year. One student always comes to mind. Her name was Ismar, and she was a fantastic, brilliant girl. But another issue I wasn't aware of was some students had to stay home to take care of their younger siblings. That was not an experience I had. And so any given day, Ismar came to school, and then she'd be gone for 2-3 days. She'd come back, study all her stuff, do pretty good on an exam, and then she was gone again for another week or so. So one day I had to say, Ismar, where are you? Why are you not here all the time? And finally she told me, well, my mom just stays at home, you know, and if I have to walk my little sister to school every day, then I come here, which is why she was always late and my class was early, so I missed her. And if mom was sick, she had to bring mom to the doctor. I had to scratch my head, and this was still only my first or second year teaching, so I didn't even know my place in terms of boundaries and what I had to give. And I said, Ismar, that's not your job. Your job, because my mom taught me my job was to go to school and get good grades. That's my job as a child. She will do whatever she needs to do to get everything else done. My job was to be a student, and a great one at that. And Ismar said, I know, but got on the phone. So, hi, Mom. Ismar's job is to come to school every day. That's her only job. Ismar can't walk her little sister to school every day. And if she has to, she needs to do that very early so she could get to school on time. I saw Ismar graduate about 2 years ago in 12th grade. That would have not been the case had she continued on that path. Ismar went on, was doing even Saturday classes for fashion. That was what she eventually fell into. But those teachers on the high school side had no idea. When I would talk about her in 7th grade, they had no idea. That's how much she changed. That they didn't even know that was a problem. They were like, Ismar, not come to school? I said, yeah, that was the thing. And that was many conversations to see how many students, for good or bad, changed as they went on. If you don't know, a big problem or crisis also happens between that 8th and 9th grade year. If you want to understand the breakdowns, in middle school, not enough students are actually taught to be students. They're taught to move on from one grade to another. So in middle school world, you go from one grade to the other. And no one tells students, hey, high school's a little different. You actually pass your classes. You gotta get those credits. You gotta actually pass every single exam because you'll be stuck. And if you don't prepare for that, you see what I see. 10th grade, 11th grade comes, an 11th grader, quote unquote, means they were there for 3 years, but they still have 5, 6 high school credits. They have a long way to go. And then that despair kind of sets in, which then goes to the cycle of, why should I be here? What is education going to do for me? If they sit at home and they can come to school with Uggs on, a $500 jacket, mom sitting at home on the couch, why would they think education makes a difference? Because to them, that's good. They got their stuff. There is nothing to work for. So we, although it may not be you or I, that is the crisis. How do you teach beyond that? Because they don't have anything to aspire to. Because to them, they have it all. There is no need to work for it because they have it. So I had to find a whole new approach to actually getting students to show up. And trust me, history is not the favorite subject out there. So again, it became on the connection of, how do I see you? How do I show you I care? That's what got them into the classroom. That's what got them to focus. They understood that Miss Houghton at one point, or Mrs. Brown, She wasn't going to kick you out of class because that was a treat for some students. No, you're going to suffer in my classroom. It's a pleasure to be here, not outside where you think that's the fun place. And only being tough, only being consistent, and mean to everybody, did they see, oh, she cares. To the 5th year there, all I had to say to new students was, go ask all the way up to 12th grade about Mrs. Houghton or Mrs. Brown, and they'll let you know. I'm not the one to play with. Because again, I understood the crisis, and middle school is the place, if you don't know, so I haven't left there. Many teachers don't like middle school, but there's a reason why, because that is the biggest challenge, if you're not aware. And we have to be honest with ourselves because, again, that is the crisis. The crisis is the gap. The crisis is low expectations. Because if that many students thought that's all there was to life, forget a subject, they have no reason to come to school. It was just to socialize, to be with their friends. So we do have to start with, one, recognizing this gap in terms of literacy across the board. That is what Common Core is about. Please do not listen to the hype about that. Because the minute you lower your expectations, we're the ones that are affected. Don't be fooled. We're the ones with the crisis and the gap of literacy, of reading and writing. And then we have to address the crisis of how will education actually help our students? Because if that's what they go home to every day, they don't see a need in how education is going to make them better. So please, please understand that is our crisis. And we as a whole, as a community, have to find all the ways to address that. Whether it's seeking out these many programs that are out there, you just gotta do your research. There's a program at NASA, at York College, that they actually give. It's a free program just for science education. Starts off in kindergarten. Eden just attended for their fall. There are programs out there. We need that exposure. But again, the crisis does start, and we can start that at home by actually reading to our students from birth. And how can we as a community actually find more and more ways to just simply look at the joys of reading and writing and the joys of what education can bring. Because it's not a complacency pretty much of we understand how important education is, we actually have to sell it nowadays. So that is the challenge for us. If you haven't noticed, I'm quite passionate about this. I did spend a year teaching high school in Westchester, which was very different. It just made me upset, and I came right back down to the city because resources are there. We just have to find a way to make them effective for all students. Again, we're more than 60 years from Brown versus Board of Ed. If you don't know that, I'll teach you a history lesson on the side. But we're very, very still separate and unequal. And we have to make sure our resources go into our students as well, to just put them not only on the even plate, but then to excel and exceed all expectations. Thank you.